Hey everyone, welcome to the 347th episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patron Ben Steer. Thanks, Ben. I'm Oren Kaplan.
And I'm Matt Unlow. Today we've got Peter Phok on the show. He's a producer who's done a ton of movies, mostly in the horror genre. The horror and thriller is kind of his wheelhouse. There's a lot of heavy hitters on this list. You know, we're talking the recent hit Perra and X, all those Ty West movies out there.
Yeah, Peter has 3 movies that came out this year. X and Pearl from Ty West. And there's already a third one coming out that A24 is making that is very exciting. Either X or Pearl, or maybe both of them, have been endorsed on this podcast before as movies you must see. And he has another movie called Dear Zoe, starring Sadie Sink from Stranger Things, which also came out this year.
Though that one's not scary. A bit of a curveball there.
And he's done a ton of stuff. He worked on VHS, the horror anthology movie, and he did The House of the Devil, a bunch of awesome movies. He knows a ton about making movies, from the $150,000 to the multi-million-dollar ones. And we have a real fun talk. We talk about how he got started, why he chose producing instead of directing, you know, a lot of the nuts and bolts. The second half is probably my favorite part of the interview, where we really talk about what he looks for in terms of making a movie, what kind of filmmaker, what's important to him. And
yeah, you know what I loved about this conversation with Peter, in addition to all of the things you just mentioned, is like there is this vibe that I'm always relieved by, where you see someone's resume and you think, oh man, they've made so many awesome things. They're this hotshot producer. And then you're like, oh, you're just like all of the other filmmakers that we talk to and hang out with and came up with, the types of people that are just like us, basically. So it was really cool to talk to Peter and like just learn his story, see that trajectory, and also get all of those little nuggets of, you know, hard-earned wisdom in the world of indie filmmaking that he's accrued over the last decade.
well, it's a pretty long conversation, so we're going to hop into it. But Matt and I have a lot of very exciting things going on.
Can't wait to talk more about it.
So we will tell you post Thanksgiving, the day this episode comes out.
Before we hop into our conversation with Peter Phok, I'd like to remind you all about our Patreon. Patreon.com/justshootitpod is the place where you can throw us a buck or two to show your support. Keep our editor Noah in the green. He's making money, living his life, making movies, doing that indie hustle, also supporting all of our server fees and all that stuff. It's that time of the year where actually all of those fees are kicking in. Got charged for my Dropbox annual subscription. I was like, oh, that's right. This ain't cheap. Patreon.com/justshootitpod. For $20, you'll get a hat. It's very cool. Keeps your head warm and in the shade, depending on what part of the world you're in. That might be, one part might be more beneficial than the other.
Did I tell you that I just wore it on set recently? And like the AD's like, ooh, I got to get that hat. Anyway, patreon.com/justshootitpod. Go there. Your life will be changed for the worse. You'll be $1 or $2 or 15 poorer every month, and Matt and I will be very happy.
Well, without any further delay, let's hop into our conversation with Peter Phok.
Hey, we are here with Peter Phok. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Welcome, Peter. Peter, you are an executive producer, and I want to talk about all of your projects, but I want to go back a little bit earlier to maybe the middle of your career, or the beginning middle. I noticed an awful lot of post-credits, an unusual number of post-credits for a producer and an EP in particular. So I was curious, tell us a little bit about your filmmaking background, and then we can kind of work into the evolution of you becoming an EP.
I went to film school in New York, School of Visual Arts, and at SVA, I was a directing major. And SVA is like sort of known for its sort of like, I think, early access to like the equipment.
Gear. Yeah.
And I was already like a computer person. You know, I was into computers and savvy with electronics and that kind of stuff. So talking about that, so I always gravitated to to cameras, and then ultimately all the editorial software. I know Avid, Premiere, and went through the evolution of digital video. So I was around for all that. Yeah. So then when cut to me becoming a producer, I was producing in New York on a lot of no budget, low budget type of stuff, like micro And so like, we didn't have a lot of, resources. And so like I ended up wearing a lot of hats. And I kind of de facto fell into some assistant editing work, and then generally was the post supervisor, whether I took the credit, or not.
You're saying you were just smart, handy, capable, but producing was kind of always the main thing you were doing, but not unlike being a good line producer or a great chef or whatever else. When you're like early in your producing career, you end up kind of filling those gaps in,
Yeah.
and so that's how post kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I think in film school, you're just sent off to like write and go direct, and then you realize like, well, who's producing? And then so that was something that like I recognized in film school. I'm like, oh, you need a producer. And so coming out of film school, that was sort of the direction I was like sort of landing. I was like, oh, like you can't direct unless you have an environment to direct in, and someone has to create that space. And so like I kind of like took that on, and yeah, and I'm also a line producer because of that.
So you're a popular guy with any director that knew what lied ahead for them. You know what I mean? Like to have a career, I think you have to have a handful of great producers, and relationships with those people. So were you producing kind of out of the gate basically, or did it take a beat
I mean,
there as well?
it took a little bit of beat just to get that confidence, but I, like, to be honest, early, I had, love movies in high school, really. And my love for movies kind of grew and grew. And that's when you sort of start thinking about, well, what are you going to do with your life? Where do you want to go to college? And so I, I really just started to kind of think about, movie making. And it's, and it was a dream sort of like, and I didn't, my parents certainly not in the industry. We certainly didn't know anyone in the industry, but it was one of those things where it's just like I think I'm first generation here, and kind of grew up in New York, and with this idea of like this country, land of opportunity, land of freedom. You can do what you want. You got to work hard for it, and so I just kind of took that mentality and that approach. But like when I kind of wanted to learn more about filmmaking, got books, started doing research, and it led me to taking this 2-day like film school as a junior in high school. And this guy Dov Simmons, and I think his course is still out there, teaches like filmmaking in what at the time it was like 38 checks that you write to make a movie, and like it was like a crash course in like how to like do a budget. There was this one video tech class that actually taught me so much, but I couldn't get into it until like my senior year. That's like video editing, right? And you're editing on like, it was SVHS, deck to deck. But
there's the computer that like you get to book at like in hour increments to like learn editing on. Right?
But the teacher, it was like, Mr. Clive was really great at breaking down the technical stuff, like on the video track, and like, what's on there. But anyhow, I find out, I probably through like Filmmaker magazine or something like that, this course is, and I have to like, convince my parents that like, this is, a worthwhile investment. While we only lived like 45 minutes away just outside of Manhattan. Like I remember like they agreed to like, pay for the course, and but then they insisted that they drive me in. They weren't going to let me just take the long railroad into the city, and then we got to find this place. So I get in there, and it's like clearly I'm like the youngest person in this classroom of adults, who have paid to 2-day crash course. And the first day is focused on like putting the project together in production. And then the second day is a little bit more geared towards like how, now that you've made this movie, how do you like get it out there and sell it? But I was just so excited to learn more about film production. But yeah, his approach was like, it was like 38 checks. If you've seen a film budget, like above the line, below the line, he broke that down, and it was just like, here are the checks. And it was like, your actors, your DP, and the department heads that you just like, these are the people that you need to have. And one of the people certainly I believe was like, like a line producer, a PM. But what I got out of all that was like, oh, this is very practical. And, it just gave me some confidence. Like, oh, I can do this. Look what I just learned in a day.
I wonder if some of what you learned taught you what producing is. Do you know what I mean? Like, it sounds like it's like a lot of like, that's a thing that doesn't really become apparent to most ambitious young film students for kind of a while. Do you know what I mean? Like, honestly, maybe like a couple years into film school, you kind of realize like, oh, my project is so big that I'm going to need someone to help that's not just holding a camera or moving lights around. Do you know what I mean?
100%. Yeah.
But also writing checks is like not sexy, right? Like when you first start, you're like,
Sure.
how do I get
Yeah,
that shot? What light do I get? How do I get an actor to do this?
Mhm.
Like, how do I move the
Mhm.
camera? I feel like camera movement's like kind of like the first thing you get excited about, right?
Yeah.
Um,
How do I make it look
but you
cool?
never think about like,
And
UPM or anything like so as
yeah, you
boring
took
as
a
that.
crash course in in line producing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like step one, here are the checks you need to write. That's like a funny. I wonder if that maybe influenced your trajectory more than you realize. You know what I mean? Like to have that.
Yeah, the business side of
I
it.
don't know. That's kind of it's mind blowing to me.
It was incredibly, invaluable. And like, and I also, at this point was already entrepreneurial, I think, in
Hmm.
high school, like with like, different ideas for different types of businesses and companies. And I do like to mention I was like in this club called Future Business Leaders of America, FBLA. And
Hmm. Hmm.
some people, are familiar with that organization, but it was,
Yeah, it's kind of like a big national thing, right?
yeah.
It's like being a mathlete or
Yes,
something. Like
exactly.
there's
Exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. You compete in like sort of business acumen stuff. And I just
Hmm.
joined the club. My friend invited me to join the club. I just joined the club essentially just to go on a free trip. That was the incentivize me. But I competed in like things like like computer applications, which was essentially like Microsoft Office, and
Hmm.
I
didn't really
love a good office
prepare. Just
competition.
yeah, right. It was like make this letterhead, make this spreadsheet, and like like
Awesome.
just set the right justification
Get
and
the
like
paper clip to get out of the screen.
yeah,
Yeah,
Clippy.
yeah.
But yeah, I competed on both the so the local level, and then we went to states competition, and then later I went to nationals. And so yeah, I think all this stuff was like kind of informing me of like, all right, business. And I started an eBay business as and that took me into college. And so this sort of business side of me was something I just like kind of felt was natural. So, but I was still kind of like thinking as a director. I was like, I want to go, into like, how do I
Hmm.
make movies? And then film school itself was like interesting because yeah, then you're just like, all right, cool, you're here now, write and direct. And it was like we had to churn them out really quickly. But the execution of production was like challenging because you didn't have that like set producer, and then they didn't have anyone who was sort of focused in that because they didn't have a producing track at the time. So now the school's evolved, and SVA
Hmm.
certainly has
Hmm.
producing classes, and it teaches you what that means. But as you were saying earlier, Matt, like, yeah, I didn't know what that really meant still while trying to make my thesis film, and that's when I was like, oh, I picked on something that's like bigger than me, and this is hard, and so you need someone that understands what it is, to run
Yeah, I could use some help in a lot of different
yeah.
ways. Yeah. So fast forward from those early realizations in film school into let's talk about VHS. 2012 VHS is like a pretty phenomenally successful horror anthology, right? It was kind of like a perfect prototype for indie DIY horror filmmaking plus the anthology model. So you can get a bunch of different pods of filmmakers to all bust their asses for like a weekend plus and then have a movie at the end of it that turns into a giant franchise, and they're still making them today. So talk to us about VHS. How did you become where were you in your career when that was kind of first happening for you?
So essentially, VHS, from my perspective, it was different. Where was I career wise? I think I've done several movies with already, certainly with Ty.
Wait, so how did you team up with Ty West? I guess that might be interesting.
Yeah, that's probably the better question then.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Ty was also at SVA, and so we met like our freshman year. We all had to take film history with Gene Davis, our history professor, and in his theater, and so that was the one class that you saw everyone in your year in. And
Mm.
so I saw Ty, and then we had a mutual friend who was also going to SVA. So freshman year, you're in like these classes with the same group of people, and you move from like block to block, but you're in the same group. But there's other blocks, and so that was in film history was the only class where you got to see all the other blocks. Like because and film was one of the bigger majors
Hmm.
at School of Visual Arts. So Sean Reed was another friend and student that I befriended at SVA, who later ends up in a lot of our early Ty West shorts, as well as The Roost, Triggerman, and but Sean was in Ty's block, and so Sean kind of bridged us, and then I would see Ty like late after hours in the editing lab, which was like the time Steenbecks, like a room full of Steenbecks, and it's like I'm like 18 years old, splicing 16 millimeter. It's awesome. This is like the coolest thing, and then just meeting
feels real. Right. Yeah.
Meeting other, people who are just as excited about doing, the work. And then at that point, let's just kind of just chatting with everybody, trying to, meet people. And so, I saw Ty working on his stuff. I was working on my stuff. And it was then. And then, I think through the course of the next, 4 years or there, ultimately, we're helping each other, sort of review cuts and that kind of stuff, and then later Ty's, inviting me to go help, be on his crew, right? Go help him kind of do stuff. And so that's where it started,
Did you feel like, so obviously he's had some, big, he's part of VHS and had some very popular movies, he has a cult following. We've had someone on the podcast actually recommend Pearl as one of their unpaid endorsements, a movie that you EP'd. Do you feel like back then he seemed extra talented relative to the other students, or were you guys all just kind of figuring it out by making bad short films?
Well, I think, as I certainly recognized right away was as, and I would never claim myself to be well watched, but Ty was certainly well watched. And
he had seen everything.
Yeah. And it was very evident that I was I've seen nothing in comparison, a lot of, and my taste was was broader, for Hollywood and studio movies.
You loved Back to the Future.
Sure.
Yeah. You go to the Blockbuster, basically.
Blockbuster and the Hollywood Video.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
try to find a cool cover, right? And then check it out.
Yeah.
So so meeting Ty, and then he introduced me to these other filmmakers that I maybe I was aware of their movies, but not really aware. And so he was because he grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, where he had not the, I'm sure there was Blockbuster Hollywood Video there, but he was going to a mom and pop video shop that was curated. And so he had that sort of education, of
I find every once in a while you'll find a in film school, a kid who there was nothing in their town, and so they learned to dig deeper than I grew up in the suburbs. So we had both a Hollywood Video and a Blockbuster, so you could walk across the street and maybe I was just lazy, but I think that there's something to when somebody has to really, really dig, they get better at it, and they kind of push themselves to find even harder to find things.
I feel like nowadays, that whole equation has changed so much because people can basically see any movie they want, but also they're probably very busy with TikTok and stuff, so on one hand they have all the access, but on the other hand, I wonder what percentage of the 18, 19, 20-year-olds are even watching movies right now, beyond the big blockbusters.
Yeah.
Because there's so much other stuff to feast your eyes on, that's easier to look at quickly.
Keeps me up at night, Oren.
But I don't know. Sometimes I'm is that job security? Are we going to be the only people that have seen movies? So Ty was very well watched. You guys started teaming up together. And then, so you're in film school. You're there to be a filmmaker, obviously. At what point are you oh, shoot, I can work on more films and collaborate with other people, and I don't necessarily have to be the director?
You pick a major early. So I was directing, and I came up and I thought, because when I was making films in high school on digital aid stuff, I'm the camera operator. I'm the DP essentially, it's so I thought I would go down that route. And then I remember taking a lighting class and then be the way they talk about lighting is not the way that I want to talk about lighting. And it was so different. And And so it just kind of steered me, I'm like, well, maybe like, and then ultimately I came to realize like, oh, I like being in control. And so I think like after, getting out of SVA, feeling like somewhat burned out on like, oh man, making my thesis film, like why did I pick something so ambitious? And what my thesis film was it was called Long Island Love Story. And it was like like probably a 20-minute musical, basically. That was like two solos and a duet. No dancing, light choreography, and it was just set in Long Island, but essentially like two people from different worlds, meeting on circumstance and then like kind of falling for each other. And my thesis advisor was just like, yeah, it sounds great, go do it. And I'm so went off and did that. But then the production of it was like, oh my god, I don't know anything about how to create this environment. It was rough, tough. And and maybe I just wasn't exposed at that point to a lot of professional sets to actually know what it's supposed to be like. So I came out of film school, it was PAing, trying to get a PA job, which was difficult because like it's not like the entry level job that people kind of lead you to believe that it is. I mean, like
Yeah. In what ways is it not an entry level job?
Well, like when PA production assistants are like the heart of any set. And if you're on a feature set, like you really want like the stronger, more experienced PAs because they are the eyes and ears of production. Walkie lingo, that kind of stuff. Like while everyone is gonna like essentially learn on the job, time is money, and you want to be efficient, and like there's not always that opportunity to be teaching when the shoot's happening. Not every AD, second AD, is going to like give you that time of day to go, all right, here's the deal, or even a key PA to like explain what's up. So if you're given the opportunity, obviously you want to learn. In New York now, there's like a Made in New York like PA program where it's like some kind of a training, and then the PAs are kind of like get that seal, and you can bring them in, and they're more experienced.
I think we have a PA boot camp, they call it out here, and they kind of help place people and things as well.
Yeah.
And I think that you kind of gives them a little bit more foundation, basically. So what I'm hearing, though, this is really fascinating. You've AD'd, you PA'd, you've got a strong background in post. So it sounds to me like in a lot of ways you come from producing really from this kind of place of understanding a lot of the different elements and what people need, how did those different jobs influence your approach to producing?
After SVA, Ty got financing from Larry Fesen's company, Glasseye Picks in New York, to make a feature right out of school called The Roost. And so
And how did he get the financing? Like off of his short films or something, or
so
scripts, or?
Ty had Kelly Reichert as a first year film teacher. Kelly Reichert is a very esteemed and talented filmmaker, and she shared an office at one point with Larry Fessenden, another East Village filmmaker who had a company called Glasseye Picks, and Ty was familiar with Larry's movies, Habit, Wendigo. And Larry couldn't make it in to speak to a class. So Ty had asked Kelly to like, would she like connect him, with Larry, and then like next Larry, like Ty's interning for Larry and kind of like being around, someone who has made some films. And I think that's what film school was for us. SVA was like kind of prided itself on having like working professionals as your professors. That was the whole like kind of push. And so and essentially like as we were all kind of finishing up our thesis films and preparing to kind of graduate SVA, Ty always tells a story where it's like he had a conversation with Larry about like next steps. Do I just pool a bunch of money and make a big time short film, and even though like we had just made a thesis film individually, and Larry's response was like, what separates you from making a movie? Like, just a little bit of like money, some resources. And essentially like, yeah, that was it. It was just some money. And so, Larry had Ty pitch a couple ideas, and then essentially kind of, would, kind of hear him out and say, what else you got? What else you got? And then Ty made up something about like a group of friends going to a wedding, and then car breaks down and they're stuck on the side of the road and they need help. They go to, they walk over to a nearby farm and then end up awaking a roost of bats, killer bats. And that's the one that Larry kind of like jived with. Larry was into horror, into genre, and
you sold me with killer bats.
so yeah, and then I remember, so that was it. I mean, so we graduated in May of 2003, and then we're on set in October of 2003. Like,
wait, and how much money did you guys have to make that?
Well, I mean, it seemed like we had. I mean, that number was always so nebulous because it's like, it's one of those things like, we don't know, but we were shooting on film.
Peter, is that your way of telling us you didn't get paid?
Oh yeah. That's yeah. I don't think any of us got paid.
But I mean, are we talking like $50,000 or like $500,000?
Well, I mean, so at the end of the day, I think like the movie itself in total through finish and everything, I think maybe cost like $150K or something like. I think.
Oh, that's it, with visual effects and everything.
Everything, yeah. I mean, yeah, but it helps to have a bunch of friends who are willing to kind of like, hey, like, let's come on board and let's do this. So Eric Robbins,
that halo of like, you guys have just graduated, you don't know what you're gonna do with your life. Someone says, hey, do you want to go make a movie even though you're not getting paid? It's like kind of not an easy yes, because like, who knows, like maybe you're living with your parents, maybe you've got a little bit of money saved, maybe not, but like I am jealous of that little sunset time where people are just kind of ready to jump onto that project.
Yeah, and that's what it was. It was I was just saying, like, Eric Robbins also went to SVA with us, was our DP. He had been already filming a bunch of like, I think it's like we're working commercials and some music videos. He bought his own Aton A Minima camera at the time, and brought that along to shoot this movie. There's a couple other friends, and then like I said earlier, Sean Reed he's casted to be in the movie. He had already been in a couple of Ty's shorts, so for us it was exciting to like, okay, let's do it. I forget, it was probably only probably like 2.5, 3 weeks maybe total of days. I probably have to like go back and look it up, but I was there to assist the producer essentially, like, and Susan Lieber was hired by Larry to then like go and produce the movie, be on the ground. We ended up filming just outside of like Wilmington, Delaware, where Ty's from, but we went into like, I think, Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. It's like the border is so close, and that's where we filmed the movie on the farm. And so I was just soaking up everything I could from Susan, and trying to learn. And then I think I ended up like, and she was teaching at NYU at the time. So she like basically, once it was going, just left me like, I think a couple of like, here's some blank checks, here's some petty cash, and just make sure everything's like,
here's 38 blank checks.
That's
now
right.
You can make a movie.
And so I'm doing everything from like PAing, having to go out and like buy stuff for the crew house. We have, but there's an AD running the shoot, and and I'm just trying to anticipate like the next day's needs. But we're pretty much at one location for this movie, this farm. So and we're on nights, so it's when the world is like, when we're the crew is sleeping, I'm out there kind of like running around grabbing what we need to make sure that we can sustain ourselves. And so, but yeah, I was just learning what I could from Susan, and then got to kind of see the movie, like, and get the movie into Avid, and like, like we were bringing the film back to New York to process the film, and then they transferred it and got into. So I think I remember setting up Ty for editorial, and then that was sort of it. And then the movie like got finished several months later, and then kind of like had its journey on the film festival circuit. And it was like a few years later. So at that point, Ty was hired to then write The House of the Devil. He reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're going to make another movie, a real movie." I said, "Okay, great." And we were excited to kind of do that, but it didn't happen right away. The financing didn't come together. And so at this point, Ty had done all these, kind of film festivals. And this is when I felt like DV was really making an emergence onto the, into the world, as far as maybe a viable, shooting format.
This could be real. It was like 21 Days Later had come out, and like I feel like the David Lynch did a movie on DV, and it was kind of like maybe this is going to be cool and viable,
right? And so so then Ty decided, let's just go out and shoot a movie instead of like continue to wait, because it'd been several years since he had directed The Roost, and so and meeting other filmmakers like Joe Swanberg and seeing what Joe was doing, and so that drove us to go make Trigger Man, which Ty had pitched to Larry once again and said, Larry, hey, can we just get like, I don't know, like 10 grand to go make a movie? And, and that was essentially like what it was.
Did Larry make his money back on The Roost?
Yes. The Roost the Roost premiered at South by Southwest and then was bought before it premiered just a few months later at like the LA Film Festival. And then The Roost took Ty to like Sitges, just outside of the Sitges Film Festival, which is like an incredible film festival for like sci-fi, fantasy, and horror and genre. And I know that like you meet a lot of great kind of like-minded filmmakers there. But yeah, I mean, so The Roost sold to, let me remember now, it was like we got a little theatrical deal, and then like and then ultimately and home video. I think Showtime like took it out for TV and stuff. Yeah,
it's interesting because this is 2005. This is like Lionsgate After Dark Film Fest like territory, right? Like, that was a time when you could actually make like a decent living making genre films.
Yeah,
and getting theatrical, like little theatrical releases, and then doing like really well on video and stuff.
Well, that was the other thing is like the home video market of DVDs was really like in full effect.
It was still going.
I mean, you could go to any like big box retailers and see like every title like 50 to 100 copies of them there, and it was just like it was stocked.
Yeah, and you're producing for Ty, you're also producing for other people at the same time, and like, is your relationship with him like obviously you still just did things with him very recently, so it's like a long over 15 years you guys have been making movies together. Like, how can you tell us a little bit about that relationship? Because we talk a lot on the podcast about like directors and DPs, directors and producers and writers, and like how that stuff, a lot of times someone's like, oh well, now we got a studio behind us, so we got to work with this producer, or we got like how does that track? Like, how why do you keep working with him, and why does he keep working with you?
I mean, it's I mean, I think there was like trust that was built early in our relationship of trust in getting the work done, and for a long time, it was like I would deal with the stuff that Ty really didn't want to deal with. It's like the paperwork and that kind of stuff, and over time the movies grow and our team grew. And Ty continues to work with the same collaborators because it's sort of that shorthand and that trust in. But everyone, as we've gotten older, everybody's at different places in their lives, and so. But yeah, I mean, the X and Pearl mark, I think my 9th and 10th collaboration with Ty, and and he before X, the last movie we did together was this revenge western called In a Valley of Violence. That stars Ethan Hawke and John Travolta. We had just an incredible cast. And on that movie, Ty, it wasn't horror, so like Ty kind of like felt a little like kind of like he wanted to just do something different. And he joined. Like we were DJ on that movie, so he's joins the guild, and that opens him up to a world of a different opportunity in directing and television, and kind of went off to do that for a number of years. For Ty, he's always just kind of driven by strong ideas for what he wants to make, and when he has a really strong idea, he's into it, he'll share it, and then more times than not, they're great ideas, and so that sort of back and forth of like, oh, that's awesome, that's good, and you get excited. And I think his superpower is like his ability to kind of sit down and commit to writing that script in a short amount of time.
That is an interesting superpower for sure, to go from like, hey, I think this is cool, to like, here, let's go make it. Here's your blueprint. If you can do that quickly, then
yes,
you've made 10 movies together with your buddies from film school,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, for a long time we would just joke. It's just kids making movies. I mean, that's what we kind of like saw ourselves as.
Were you involved in getting that cast together in the Valley of Violence, like Ethan Hawke and John Travolta?
No, that was the benefit of working with Jason Blum's company, Blumhouse. You know, they had casting director in-house that was there to sort of help, and I think like Jason was meeting with Travolta because like they had done a good movie, I think, with Jennifer Lopez in it, like The Boy Next Door.
Right. And that's kind of the thing that made proved their model, right?
Right. And
yeah, I think everybody got rich off that movie, basically.
So then I think John had heard about, that success and was like, okay, well, maybe I would.
Was that your first movie with Blumhouse?
Yes.
And it's so, I'm looking here at the credits. So you're a capital P producer on that film.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so how, like, when you have a Blumhouse and they've already made kind of the Boy Next Door, the J-Lo film that did so well, like, is it hard to sell yourself? Like, don't they have their own producers? Like, how does that?
Yeah, sure.
That
well, I mean, I think it's like, it's having incredibly loyal, like having incredible loyalty. I think, and then Ty kind of stood behind both myself and Jacob Jaffe as his like kind of partners in being the guys on the ground making the movie. And so, so that's sort of like how we were still there and we were able to make the movie because at the end of the day, it's like, there could be all the producers in the world. At the end of the day, it's like, who is on the ground that's making the movie?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important to, like the process of filmmaking.
And so did you make other movies with Jacob Jaffe? Was he one of the SVA guys with you?
So at the time while we were at SVA, Jacob was at NYU and Jacob I was introduced Jacob through like maybe like two other collaborators. We had Zeke Dunn, who was like a first AD on House of the Devil. And actually right before House of the Devil, I made a movie called so what happened, I guess I got to take it back just a little bit just to understand what had happened. So I go and produce Trigger Man that Larry finances for like $10K. We didn't have a lot. We just get it done, probably 10 days or something like that in Wilmington, Delaware. As soon as I got back, Larry goes, "Oh, great. Like, I have another script for you to go make." And that was Graham Resnick's movie. So I went off and did that. And it's all under the glass eye. And so next thing you know, I'm just, and then I come back and Graham Resnick grew up with Ty in Wilmington, Delaware. And he was at NYU. And then come back, Larry gives me another script that was I Still the Dead. And this is Glenn McQuaid's script, which was much bigger ambitions. These three movies, this trilogy, they were called scare flicks as sort of like by Larry. I got paid on these movies, not much, but definitely like, saw something. And I think on I Still the Dead was the movie I felt more like kind of driven to step up as a producer and get, a notable cast. Glenn, the director, had worked as VFX supervisor on Larry's movie The Last Winter that starred Ron Perlman. So he was in Iceland with Larry and Ron and like built a little bit of rapport. So Glenn was able to like kind of slip the script to Ron to get, him sort of like potentially consider it. And then for the role of Arthur Blake in the movie, I kind of sat Glenn down, like, who are you thinking? What are you envisioning? And I was just thinking about how many times Ty has had us in his parents' basement watching Lord of the Rings. And Mary, the Hobbit, played by Dominic Monaghan, came to mind, but I was also recognizing.
I was like, are you a Lord of the Rings fan or are you a Lost fan?
And I was a super Lost fan.
I had my money on Lost. You were a Lost fan?
Yes.
Okay,
so
good.
you win there.
You
Yeah.
go.
So Lost was like, this is like 2006 going to 2007.
Yes. So fun.
Yeah. So, so then, I told Larry and Glenn and I was like, oh, we should get Dominic Monaghan. They're like, oh yeah, great. But like, they didn't think it was possible and how would I do it? And so, I just got his reps, his agent's number from IMDb Pro. And then, just kind of cold called him and pitched him the movie. And
did you have like a number in mind when you cold called him? Or did you
what do you mean a number? Like
an offer?
Oh, no, not at all. My goal was just to like, let's just, let's just, I knew enough to like, let's just find out if he's available and if he was open to reading. And,
Mhm.
and I kind of pitched the concept of the project and they're like, and like, and, to some extent it was cool that, we were financed to some degree. But the budget grew later. But at the time, like we were going to make the movie, Larry was already committed to financing the movie, and I just
And
wanted
is
to kind of like
this
raise the stakes. Yeah.
is this Larry guy making money from making movies, or where is all this money coming from?
Well, yeah, I mean, he wasn't losing money on making movies at the time, and yeah, because home video was like thriving. You can make genre movies and sell them, and they they made money back. And Larry is a big supporter of art, of the arts, and artists, and that was his whole sort of vibe. Like Running Glass I Picks was like, where it was like a community for independent artists, and if if a couple bucks could like help make your career happen, then he was there to support. And so I think we owe like our careers and everything to Larry, and he's such a godfather for this sort of community of independent filmmakers. So I take us back to I Saw the Dead, and that movie, and then after I Saw the Dead, right on it, that's where Jacob was introduced to me. So he came on to sort of help, and I think came on as a coordinator, and then I thought Jacob's demeanor was great, and he just great attitude, positive vibes, and then it was like, all right, so I invite him. Well, he asked to be. He's like, I want to work with you on the next project, and that was House of the Devil, and so then I bring Jacob on, and he ultimately is the production manager, and I'm line producing it, and we get House of the Devil made, and it was tougher because at that point Ty had then went off to do Cabin Fever 2, and then had come back and was waiting for the edit, and it was like the waiting was just not something that like Ty like really kind of enjoyed. So and then finally we got money to go make House of the Devil, so it was like, all right, this is happening. And so but he wanted he had come off of a movie that with a lot more resources than what we had on House of the Devil, so it was now our job to adjust to delivering more experienced people and an organization, because he's had it, and even though we had less,
he got a taste. He was like, oh, what if there was more than one monitor?
So yeah, I mean, it was interesting because he came in and like didn't like the locations that we had found, and so it was like, okay, like now we have to like find new locations, and
which was like a change of speed. Like before, he'd be like, okay, we'll make this work.
Yeah, well, it was before. I mean, before it was always like, oh, he had the location in mind, but now he is like, I think he was coming in from LA, and and landing in Connecticut, and while he had seen some of the like the location photos, we just didn't have the the right level of like sort of like people at the time on the movie, and so like I think Jacob grabbed his roommate to come in, who was a location person, and then he came on board to kind of help manage the location in particular, like the house in House of the Devil, which is what we ended up with. Was owned by this woman who was like, she had very specific needs. She was going through a medical situation, and like we weren't quite, I think like, we didn't give her the script. We were sort of like, the movie's called The House, kind of dropped the of the devil.
Yeah. I want to dig in on this just a tiny bit more, because I think that we talk about on the show that first time you kind of level up, you feel the bump, and all of a sudden you need a producer. Maybe you've been doing your web series or your short films or your student films or whatever, and there's like it can be like just one or two more people, and all of a sudden the logistics of a shoot become just that much more complicated. You have to get parking, you have to get catering, all of that stuff.
And even
from a director's perspective,
even like the ambition, right? All of a sudden, and you're like, oh, I guess we could get a permit. We don't have to steal this, or we could call this actor's agent. We don't have to like ask who knows who knows who,
just, Right. And from a directing perspective, I think there is that shift where you you maybe take a hat off. All of a sudden, you're not doing quite as much producing as you used to. It used to be that you'd have to kind of just do everything, and like you'd call cut, and like in the back of your head you'd be like, okay, well, I want to make sure that lunch is getting ready and this, and like you're your own AD and all that stuff, and you can kind of relax, and then you have to retrain yourself to like run lines with an actor or like check in on lighting. Like you focus more on directing and less on producing. But I guess I hadn't thought about the way in which a director's demeanor or their expectations change once things bump up, and how that affects their longtime collaborators and producers, right? So like locations was a thing. What are some of the other things that, like, as you felt your longtime collaborators leveling up, what were the things that you felt like you needed to do to kind of meet them at this level?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like, honestly, just like supporting his asks. That was I mean, it was like, instead of like, it was like, how do we, and I think this is the thing that that in commercials, like, it's certainly the case, like, how do you not say no to the client, and so
Sure. Right.
and so it's like, yeah, it's like, okay, so we can't, if I can't, I don't want to say no, but I will suggest, like, what we can do, right? You got to come, come up with solutions to a problem that you may have. And so that was it. It was always being pragmatic and kind of listening to, what his concerns or issues were, and, and how do we remedy it? And like, and as long as like there was like that ongoing of like, here's the plan, and he liked knowing what was going on. Didn't want to be kept in the dark, and so,
Right.
yeah.
I love that attitude. Like, I mean, because there are a lot of producers who I think they think their job is to get a project on time and on budget and to rein in the director. But like, I love kind of the attitude of like, my job is to not say no to the director. Like, how can I be creative and find ways?
Really, Oren, you like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I know it sounds obvious or like funny, but I have worked with producers that are like, hey, like, there's no way we can do that. Like, why are you even asking about that? And then I've worked with producers that are like, yeah, you want the Steadicam? We'll figure out how to get that in there. Like, is there anything that we can combine to make this work? Like, that they will involve you in the finding the solutions, or like they'll find the solution for you without you, without saying no. And there's something like very awesome about that. And like, to think of the director as your client as a producer is pretty awesome. Because I mean, Matt, you and I have a million times the client has asked for something ridiculous, and our instinct is to be like, no, that's not going to happen. Stupid. But but we end up saying like, well, what if we think about it this way? Find a way that it works for both of us.
Yeah, I would, and then I would, probably, preface it with sort of like, how important is this to you? Is like, do we, put resources or shift resources? I mean, that's the job of the line producer, right? It's like, it's like we're shuffling the things around in order to kind of like, make, prioritize what is important, and, in film, it's like the director is leading the creative charge, right? And so, yeah, that was, and then I also felt became suddenly really important. It wasn't just about having a body there, like a crew person, right? But it was really important to then have the right vibe, like someone with the right demeanor that's going to mesh well, because they're working in sort of, fairly intimate conditions, like when you're on set,
Talk a little bit more about that. I'm curious, because I think there's nice people, there's friendly people, right? But what was the X factor that made sense for that particular crew? Was it just, yeah? Like,
I think that's like what we learned on that movie, and then how we kind of proceeded on subsequent movies, right? Was like, that I think that like was simply that it was like that, that it wasn't just about finding somebody who's available to come in and do the job, but to really like check references, and then also in in certain cases, like, introduce them to the director, and and really see like auditioning, and so
and would you do that for literally every crew member? Was everyone kind of vetted that way?
I mean, like, yes. I mean, not everyone met with the director, but I would always say, and I remember, it's like, hey, like if you have a bad, if you're feeling weird about, just say it. Just like, let's not beat around the bush. Let's not like delay because there's no time.
Yeah.
And it's not personal. It's just, personalities. It's just like
just not clicking. Yeah.
and I like to this day now, and like now I'm producing and line producing. I am, working in the commercial world as well, and it's a lot of trying to build the right vibe. Um, one that's like that gets it, that understands, uh, and I think I do pride myself on putting together like really like good crews, and like that and that like that feels seen and respected. That's the other thing. It's like about communication, especially coming from low budget stuff where we didn't have the resources. I mean, that was the one thing that I would say, hey, look, the rate's not great, but like here's the script. This is why we're making this movie. We believe in this movie, um, and also just I think like I think something I would say was like, oh, if we don't pay you well, maybe we'll pay you on time, and or even fast.
Sure. Yeah. Which is, it's valuable. That's for real. It's so funny. I didn't realize you did commercials as well. I think Oren and I do a lot of commercials, and it always blows my mind how the number that you're given to shoot for a day or two, certainly you could make a movie with that same number. But just for whatever reason, it never feels like you have enough money on a commercial, even though it's like you're ringing every bell and blowing every whistle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, talk to me about the gear shift between, doing a commercial that's, 6 figures a day, versus that indie filmmaking where that could literally be a week's worth of shooting or something like that. Like certainly now, like I think the scale of your features is much greater, but like it wasn't that long ago that you were still doing these scrappy movies.
Yeah.
Right?
So like I think my experience in commercials didn't start until after I moved out to Los Angeles. I just somehow was either too busy and just never really kind of like got that opportunity to do commercials. And I didn't like, I remember being kind of like someone reached out to me about coming in to like kind of like help them with a live action shoot, what they called it. It wasn't a commercial, it was a live action shoot. And I go, okay, what does that mean? They're like, like, do you know how to like put it together and like, like do a bunch of like, yeah, of course I could do that. And so I came in for the meeting, but I was reluctant because I just wrapped my first series effort that Graham Resnick wrote and directed, and it was like a 8-episode series that we shot as a little feature for Shudder here in Los Angeles. So I just come off of that. That's in post production, and it's sort of on like somewhat autopilot in terms of like I got a couple of weeks to wait until like there's an edit to look at, and like so. In theory, I am available, but my mentality is like, oh, I have so much rap to do, but like, it will get done. And, so, and I remember like, taking a look at this sort of like live action need. And it was like, oh, they needed to go get some epic shots, on some like, kind of beautiful location that like didn't seem like LA. And then I was like, great. Okay. Well, put the numbers on paper, learn the AICP bid format. That was like number one. And then, just leaned on my indie crew that just worked with me, and there was like, hey,
get them paid.
Exactly. I was like, look, I can like double, certainly double, their rates, for like probably, less time, and I was like, oh, okay, this is how. And I'm like, oh, no wonder. Like, this is what, and then it also explains the like I was so grateful for the crew that we were able to pull together for Dead Wax. But at the same time, like it was different than like, than what I'm used to working with in New York. There's sort of like a New York hustle that I'm used to. And maybe like when I came up, I mean, indie film was such a sort of a new thing, and whatever it was. And I was like, oh, like it was different on working with crews out here. And that's because like I kind of realized is like, because on any given day, they're offered like double, triple the rate on any number of commercials, union, non-union across, the city. And so it's sort of like, oh, they get paid a lot more to probably do a lot less. And so that was like, it was different. It was like, okay, this is vibes. And I've experienced in vibes because I've gotten to make movies in different places. And so, you just come to realize like, oh, this is the pace of this crew. Okay, cool. And then, the conversation with the AD and DP and director is just sort of like, all right, so how do we manage, our expectations with the pace at which we move at, especially when something like smaller challenge budgets and we're still trying to push like, 30 plus setups a day.
Right. 30 plus a day. Yeah.
It's a lot more than your average commercial. So,
sure.
Yeah. Well, so I feel like I know we're kind of running out of time here. Like, I'd love to kind of jump to like the final topic, which I'm sure, Matt, you have the same question, which is like, so now you're a producer and an executive producer, which I get. Well, real quick, just in like 2 sentences, can you tell us the difference in your mind between an executive producer and a producer?
I think that the producer is more is generally more like involved on the day-to-day with the project. That that's the difference.
Boots on the ground versus on the ground, in the office.
Sure. Yeah.
And the executive producer has done something to help get this movie made. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because I see like you're sharing your EP credit on a movie like Pearl with like Kid Cudi and like Sam Levinson, the creator of Euphoria, like kind of some interesting names here. I mean, like, so, Pearl is a prequel to X. So Sam Levinson, is on board with his company and, loves, like basically a big supporter of the movie and Ty and has that, clout in the world along with, Jacob Jaffke is producing along with Kevin Turin and Harrison Chris. And then like the deal is made for one movie. And then when it turns into 2, it's like everyone's on board. I guess what the question I wanted to ask is like, so now you've had producer credits, you've had EP credits, you've worked on many successful movies, small movies, big movies, medium movies, A-list casts. How do we get you to make our movie? Like, what are you interested in when you look at a script, when you are looking for the next project, when you decide either to be an EP and help a movie get made or be a producer and be really hands-on on a day-to-day basis? Like, what excites you? What can you tell our listeners of like how they can make a movie with someone like you? Aside from going to SVA with you. Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I will say that I'm very like kind of filmmaker driven. I think like it's the body of work at this point, and then sort of like, I always say like something along the lines of like, just to go back to that vibe, it's like, let's making movies is like, it's taxing, right? It's challenging work and it takes a long time. So let's make movies with people like you enjoy going to dinner with, and I think that's like sort of a vibe,
Well, so that's interesting though. Okay. So filmmaker driven, right? That makes sense.
Yeah.
There's got to be a little bit more to it than that,
absolutely.
right? Because certainly there's, I'm imagining, I always think of like the guy driving home from set, listening to the show, who's like, I got to get this feature off the ground. I've been shooting for whatever, I've been camera operating and I really want to get my first feature going. There's got to be, what are the other elements? What are the other
I think
recipes?
A sort of a serious intent at doing it. And that's like a sort of a grounded approach, like I think, you could have all the ambition and vision for, and we could remain optimistic for the resources, but I think getting practical about what you're able to execute within your own means, and then I think and being organized and being able to present that in a sort of kind of like convincing way, and I mean I think that's what makes sort of the difference, because you got to like be able to answer like, why should this project be made, and and why are you the person that's like going to do it?
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of just being realistic within your means. I think is interesting because there is that film school damage of like, well, my first feature is going to be 15 million and then I'll keep going from there. And then also I think you've come from the experience of making successful micro budget films, right? Because I think with the other thing that we see is like oftentimes filmmakers will make something that costs 10, 20, 50, $100,000, but just doesn't have a home anywhere. Doesn't make sense in the marketplace, even though they made it for super
Right.
cheap.
Yeah, super cheap isn't necessarily like the recipe for success. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
And there's, and sadly, there's like, what you learn over the years is like, I think the only reward for making something on a low budget is that you're more likely to then recoup, but that's not always the
Mm-hmm.
case. I think you have to take a sort of a broader look at the economics of movies and what's going on, and because we're American, we think a lot about releases here, domestic releases here, but the reality of the industry is that it's a global economy, and you're looking at
Mm-hmm.
releasing a movie that could perform elsewhere, and that ability for that movie to perform elsewhere is really important to the overall, and I think if you're making a movie that has like very relatable, that transcends like language, I think that's like strong. And so like I happen to produce in a lot of genre and in specifically horror, and horror and thrillers, and so that can transcend a language barrier, and that's the thing that we found with our movies, is that they perform well, but they also perform well like outside of the US, and that like was really important in the economics of it all.
A thing that I've been thinking about a lot, Peter, is the question like, does it make sense to make an indie film that's not a horror or thriller movie? Like, and I don't know truly if financially it does. Like, can you make an indie rom-com that's going to pop enough to, recoup and essentially only in a domestic marketplace? Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I would never say like no to that. But I would say it's like, it depends, like as your first feature, you know, that's, it's questionable, but you got to do it on the terms,
Sure.
on the terms that, of the resources you have, it's like,
That sounds like a no to me, Peter.
I like that,
Yeah.
usually we get the answer that it depends, which is like not an interesting answer, but
Sure.
I feel like you're giving us more of an answer, which I
well,
do
yeah, I
find
mean,
useful.
how good is that script? If that script is really good, then certainly it deserves to be made. But it's like, the bigger challenge is how do you get people to read it?
Do you feel like when you're looking at a project, you're thinking first about who's going to watch it, or about like how it, like if you want to watch it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if I'm interested, but I'm not like, I don't have to be the audience for the movie.
Right.
But it's like but it's I think it's movie making. It's like there's two approaches to it. Where are you making the movie for yourself? As the filmmaker, or are you making it as a form of like some level of entertainment for your audience? And then can you define that audience? And like and I think if you're sort of honest in sort of whichever direction, right, for yourself or for an audience, or like a combination of both, I think that and you can execute it well, then I think there's an audience. Either if you made it for yourself, then it's about finding that audience that's going to appreciate your sensibilities, right? And if you're making for an audience, then it really just needs to be targeted for that audience.
Yeah, just dial it in.
Interesting. I think about that question a lot, and I've recently been I feel like I've kind of been like trying to make stuff for an audience, and I work mostly in commercial, so it's like, a weird place to think about it. But I feel like I'm making a major shift recently to like really not worrying about what the client, the agency, the audience, the what's popular on TikTok, and just being like, this is what I think is awesome. And like, if you're on board, let's make it. And if you're not on board, then let's not make it,
Right.
Like that, the stuff that you're making kind of against your instincts or passion, like is probably never going to be that good.
Yeah, exactly. I think that like being true to yourself and like, yeah, if you get excited about it, genuinely excited about it, that excitement generally can be very contagious. And that's what, we find in Ty, and I find with other filmmakers. It's like, oh, like this is awesome. And you just try to find and build the team that's going to support that, and like, and then I think, I mean, I'm still, very romantic about filmmaking, where it's, it's like I work in commercials, for, you know, for certain reasons, and then I'm still
Money.
still drawn to making, yeah.
No, but also, I
Yeah.
mean, the schedule is amazing, right? You go shoot for a
Yeah, the
day or
schedule,
two or
yeah.
three, and then you're back at home.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and they are truly super fun, right?
yeah,
Like there's a lot of upsides to commercials for
yeah.
sure. But yeah.
It's rare that it's only 2 or 3 for me. It's still 3 weeks or something in my
Oh,
world.
right. But on set, I mean,
Oh, right.
Yes,
Shooting. Yeah,
yes. It's only a couple days, and then and the best part about commercials for me is like, here's the drives, and the footage, and
Oh, sure.
because I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
dealing with post on it, and but that phrase, if you build it, they'll come. If you make a movie, and that I think you just find an audience.
are you down to hang out and endorse something in our unpaid endorsement segment?
Absolutely, yes.
Unpaid endorsements.
So what I will advocate for is people to go see this movie that I have nothing to do with. But it's called Bad Axe, and it's a documentary that is coming out from IFC Films. It's from a filmmaker, David Siev, who basically documented his family in the town of Bad Axe, Michigan, as they dealt with the pandemic. And why I'm drawn to the project is because David comes from a mixed race family. His father is Cambodian American, his mother's Mexican American, and I'm Cambodian American. So I really connected with it, and I want to support indie films and also films from filmmakers who are underrepresented. So that's my plug, Bad Axe.
Well, so my unpaid endorsement, I have been writing to the soundtrack to the Joe Perra, the Adult Swim show that recently ended. It's like nice, mellow ambient music. It's like melodic, but like still like very mellow.
Where did you
Doesn't put
find
me
it?
to sleep exactly. It's on Spotify. All 3 seasons of Joe Perra.
Joe Perra talks with you.
Are Joe Perra Talks With You. Pardon me. Joe Perra Talks With You. That soundtrack, great to write to. If you don't write an action scene to it. So that is my unpaid endorsement. Kaplan,
That's
what
awesome.
you got?
That's a good one. I have a weird one. I just have like an Instagram post. I've mentioned this guy before on Instagram. He's at the Chris Doe. This guy named Chris Doe. He's just like a kind of business, like he's a freelance advisor. Like he's a designer, a graphic designer, but he just gives advice.
Mm-hmm. You mean The Future?
Yes, The Future. But I think he has a separate account called the Chris Doe, which is where I saw this post. And it's called How to Identify the 4 Types of Clients. Basically he has the price buyer, the window shopper, the know-it-all, and the value buyer. And I'm just going to spoil this because I love this stuff, because as a freelancer, the worst thing is when someone's like, so how much is that going to cost you? Or like, what's your rate? And like, you want to be creative and you want to talk about like the project and all that stuff. But, you don't want to spend all this time and then realize that they're not going to pay you, and so he's really good at like just teaching people to ask for what they're worth up front and to weed out the people that they shouldn't do business with. And so like he had like the price buyer is the person that's trying to find the lowest price, the window shopper is someone that's undecisive. They're just trying to kind of feel out like, how much does this cost? And they're talking to all these different people and they're like, hey, show me a proposal. Like, what would you do? Asking you to work for free, basically. The know-it-all is like the one that's like, I know that's easy. I could do it myself, but I'm just hiring you because I'm like too important. And then the final one is the value buyer. And they're the people that realize that time and your work is important and they will pay you for it. And he kind of has like the things you should say to the other people, like for instance, the know-it-all, the person that says, it's easy, but I'm just going to hire you to do it, is like, he says you should just agree with them, tell them, it is easy. Like anyone can do this. Like, why are you even spending money on this? Like you should just do it yourself, and he kind of has these like answers for all these people that it's like it reminds me of like Socrates, how he, there's this scene in one of his books where he calls the server over and he like asks him enough questions to get the server to come up with the Pythagorean theorem on his own, and like, I feel like Chris Doe is very into this, like negotiation where you're like teaching the buyer what your value is, you know. And I don't know, I just love that stuff. So it's the Chris Do. It's on Instagram. Just look for how to identify the 4 types of clients. And Do is D-O, the Chris Do. Anyhow, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Peter, for talking to us.
Where can listeners keep track of your work, find out more about you? Are you on Instagram?
Yeah.
Do you tweet for the next few weeks? Who knows? You know,
not too active on Twitter, to be honest. But yeah, definitely on IG. You just get me at Peter Phok. You know, and I try to keep you know, the collection of, you know, movies I've made or whatever commercial stuff I'm doing on my website, peterphok.com.
And PETRPHOK.com.
That's right. Phok with a silent H. Yeah.
We are across all social media at Just Shoot a Pod. We'd love to hear from you. Tweet at us, email us, Mastodon us. We love hearing from you guys.
Hive us, maybe? I don't know. We got to figure that out.
You can find me on Instagram. I'm at O'Kaplan. On Twitter, I'm at SmiteyPyleg.
And I'm at Mr. Matt Enlow across all social media. This episode was edited by Noah Bayshore. Thanks, Noah. Welcome back. And our producer is Tyler Small. And you're listening to music by the Free Music Archive and the artist Jazar. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.